Welcome back. Our next guest is an environmental activist who has campaigned on behalf of Indigenous people all around the world.
In his new memoir, Life in the City of Dirty Water, he shares his experiences growing up Indigenous in Winnipeg. It's a story of grief, resilience, and triumph, and it's a real honor to have him here today. Clayton Thomas-Muller, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks everyone. It's really good to be here.
Clayton, we're delighted to have you. And I'm interested in always where we start when we write books. And this book came in part out of a therapy session that you had. Your therapist was suggesting that maybe you should put pen to paper because you had been expressing the fact that you found it difficult to connect with your kids. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
And yeah, I guess about 7 years ago, my family and I were living in the capital city in Ottawa, and I was finding myself having a very difficult time doing, the day-to-day things that a parent does with their children. My boys at the time were about 4 and 6, and playtime, reading time. I found myself going into autopilot, and so I talked to my therapist about it, and he told me that this is very common behavior for people that have survived Indian residential school, or for the children of Indian residential school survivors like myself, to express patterns of dissociative behavior, and that it's part of that whole fight or flight thing that comes with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I asked him, how do I deal with that? Because, I want to be a good father to my boys and, end those negative cycles that exist within our community. And he said, well, you should do the things you're doing, go to Sundance, smoke your pipe, go to sweat lodges, exercise, all that good stuff. And he said, and you should also start journaling, reading about it.
Your mom made a decision that many parents have made: leave the community, go to the city in the hopes that it's going to get the children a better opportunity. But like you and like so many others, it resulted in disconnection from community and landed you in juvie, where you say that life in jail did not reform you, it politicized you. How so?
Mm-hmm. I know for myself, going through public school, being of that first generation that went to public school and didn't go to residential school like those in my family before me, I always had this nagging sense that there was this kind of evil force, making me feel dirty or guilty. And, it was the same thing in juvie. I had witnessed a lot of really young Native kids getting abused by non-Native prisoners and by the guards in these facilities, working with these white kids, creating unnecessary tensions. And I started talking to some of the other Native kids, and we decided that we were sick of it, and we created a little block, but we weren't, going out to beat people up on the unit. We just made a declaration that, look, there's going to be no more fighting or no more picking on people or any of that stuff. There's just going to be peace. But I'll never forget, when I got released and looking at all those little Native kids, they just had such sad looks on their faces, and gosh, I sure hope they made it,
I mean, your story is so inspiring. You became an activist and an educator at a very young age. And then you ended up going back to those very same juvenile detention centers that you were in. So what was it like to be on the other side of that dynamic?
There were a few people in my life, including my son's mother and my older brother, John, who was part of a group of Native men that started the largest Native gang in the country, the Manitoba Warriors. That's who my first job was working for. I ran a drug house for them. And, they sat me down when I was just a teenager and said, you've got a lot of smarts, and you really should find yourself, education and get out of this lifestyle. So I turned that around and, at a very young age, started a youth organization here in Winnipeg called Aboriginal Youth with Initiative with a bunch of my friends from the Native Youth Movement, trying to help young people, instead of pipelines to prison, to build pipelines to Sundance, and help, young people who were falling through the cracks of Canada's social safety net, and to give them what, helped myself and so many other Indigenous peoples. Language, culture, our ancestors, these are profound foundational things that, help Indigenous peoples, I think, come back, from the echoes, and the cracks that things like Canada's Indian residential school policy have created in our families and communities. So
Yeah, Clayton, you experienced more trauma as a kid than any kid ever should. And then because you chose this path as an adult, you've experienced career burnout because of the intensity of the work that you're doing. And I understand that you're on your way shortly to a healing lodge to help deal with some of your PTSD. Can you talk about the importance of that kind of self-care?
So I know for myself, and many Indigenous peoples that do frontline work and that are organizers or campaigners, a lot of the time when you're engaging with our people and our grassroots leaders, you're also doing peer-to-peer counseling. You're helping intervene in crisis situations. So, yeah, over my 20 plus years of working in our Native nations, I've experienced many burnouts, and every time you got to come up with a strategy to heal your mind, body, spirit, and make sure your emotions are good, and then come back again and get right back on the horse. So yeah, no, I'm heading down to an Indigenous-run healing center that specializes in PTSD at the end of December, and I'm really excited about it because I'm 44 now, and I got a lot of life and work left in front of me, and I've got 2 teenage boys, so yeah, it's going to be a really good experience, I'm certain.
Clayton, you do incredible work as an environmental campaigner, and you say the first time you went to the Alberta tar sands, it changed your life. What struck you most from that experience?
The word that comes to mind is violence. It's just a huge wound on the surface of Mother Earth. A wound so large that you can see it from the International Space Station. It's the largest industrial project in the history of humankind. They've moved more earth in the tar sands than the Suez Canal, the Great Pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, and the world's 10 largest hydroelectric dams combined. And so for me, the tar sands, is a lot of its pipeline infrastructure goes through my treaty territory, Treaty 6, and these are the lands that were promised to my family, my nation, for us to hunt, fish, and trap, rights that are inalienable, that are enshrined in Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. And, these lands are under threat by these multinational oil corporations and domestic oil corporations and the provincial and federal governments they're working in collusion with. And so, yeah, I felt a lot of sadness and anger, and channeled that into action. But from a place of compassion and empathy, and from the love that our ancestors have to keep us moving forward.
We've got a really unique situation, though, because as you point out, 75% of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people are under the age of 30. And that's an interesting thought when you're looking forward. What do you think that's going to mean for this place we call Canada?
If you think about it, if Indigenous peoples, migrants, and immigrants are the biggest, group of people entering the workforce in the next decade and beyond, that represents the hugest transference of economic power to the most marginalized populations, in Canada, ever in the history of this young country, this young settler colonial state. And that's going to be a very significant change and shift in the way that decisions are made by this new economically empowered and super woke group of young workers that's about to take over the economy.
So much to look forward to. Clayton, thank you so much for sharing your story and for taking some time with us today.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The book is called Life in the City of Dirty Water, and it is available everywhere now. Go get yourself a copy. We'll be right back.